Stone Brothers production.
Hello viewers, we are starting a new series thanks to a subscriber giving us an idea. If you have any more ideas for upcoming series, leave it in the comment section below and we will pick out the best idea you all agree on. I'm going to be speaking for this episode while my brother edited the video. This series will be broken down into a few episodes. This series will be about serial killers who killed in multiple states.
Number 5. Robert Ben Rhoades. Robert Ben Rhoades was born in Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1945, raised initially by his mother. Afterward, his father returned from overseas because he was stationed in West Germany as a soldier for the U.S. Army. Robert was still a child attending elementary school and found out that his father was discharged from the military. After his father was discharged from the military, he found work as a firefighter.
While Robert was in his early stages of life, he was more or less normal, aside from unspecified social problems during his developmental years.
He had an extensive amount of school extracurricular activities, which included playing football and wrestling for the school team. He was also in the boys' glee club, choir, and French club. After, in his mid-teen years while in high school, he had some issues developing. He was arrested at the age of 16 in 1961 for tampering with a vehicle, along with an arrest for publicly fighting at the age of 17 in 1962. After Robert graduated from Monticello High School in 1964, he joined the Marine Corps to better himself. During that same year, his father was arrested for molesting a 12-year-old girl, and afterward he committed suicide while waiting on trial.
Rhoades only lasted a few years in the Marine Corps, being dishonorably discharged from the military in 1967 or 1968 for his involvement in a robbery.
Robert attempted to join college, but he dropped out and later pursued to join a law enforcement agency, but was likely rejected for his past dishonorable discharge from the Marines. During the 1970s through the 1980s, Robert married 3 different women, having a son with his first wife. He worked in stores, supermarkets, warehouses, and restaurants for his jobs and careers. Eventually, Robert became a long-haul trucker while picking up interesting hobbies during the 1980s. His hobbies and interests included involving himself in the BDSM scene. It was also alleged that he verbally and sexually abused his third wife, Deborah Rhoades. Rhoades was believed to have killed his first victim in November 1989. Rhoades preyed on hitchhikers and truck stop prostitutes. Robert's first victims were Candace Walsh and her husband, Douglas Ziskowski, in January 1990. The couple was hitchhiking when Rhoades had seen them and picked them up in his long-haul truck. Shortly after they entered his truck, he immediately shot and killed Ziskowski. He dumped Ziskowski's body in Sutton County, Texas, while keeping his girlfriend in the truck for a week. Robert brutally raped and tortured Candace multiple times during that week. After killing her in his sleeper cab, he dumped her body in Utah and started seeking out more victims. He abducted 2 more hitchhikers who were both also runaway teenagers from the Houston suburb of Pasadena, Texas. 14-year-old Ricky Lee Jones was killed and disposed of while he kept Regina K. Walters for some time. Jones's body was found on March 3, 1991, in Lamar County, Mississippi, and it took analysts until July 2008 to confirm that it was his corpse. Later evidence shows photos that were seized during a search of Rhoades' home, showing that he held her for a long time based on the degree of hair growth and bruising. Robert was finally caught on the side of Arizona's I-10 highway when his truck was on the side of the road with the hazard lights on. When the highway patrol investigated inside Robert's cab, he discovered a nude 18-year-old woman handcuffed and screaming for her life. Robert was also in the truck, failing to talk his way out of the situation, which led him to become arrested and charged with aggravated assault, sexual assault, and unlawful imprisonment. After further investigation, the arresting detective, Rick Barnhart, was able to make a connection to other cases that stretched over the course of at least 5 months. The 18-year-old victim told detectives that Rhoades told her he was known as Whips and Chains and had been involved in such activities for years. Other victims that stepped up claimed almost the same exact stories. The They found out that he killed at least 3 victims with numbers up to 50, confirmed victims being Walters, Walsh, and Ziskowski. Robert was sentenced to life without parole in Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois. Number 4. Christopher Bernard Wilder, aka the Beauty Queen Killer. Christopher Bernard Wilder was born on March 13, 1945 in Sydney, Australia. He was the son of an American naval officer and an Australian national. Wilder nearly died at birth but recovered, and he almost died from drowning in a swimming pool at the age of 2. Wilder was a race car driver who put his skills behind the wheels to use for other pastimes, which included kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder. Wilder was only 17 or 18 years old when he pleaded guilty in a gang rape case at a beach in Sydney and was put on probation. During this time, he also received electroshock therapy, which is the best course of treatment due to his violent sexual tendencies. It was said Wilder was known to have virtually memorized the text of the 1963 novel The Collector by John Fowles. The novel was about a man that keeps a woman in his basement against her will until she dies. A copy of the novel was found along with his possessions after his death. About 5 years later, in 1968, he married his first wife, but she left him after only a week and suggested that his treatment hadn't worked. Wilder immigrated to the United States in 1969, first living in Boynton Beach, Florida in a mansion while making a small fortune in real estate. He developed an interest in photography and also an interest in racing cars and boats alike. He'd get expensive cameras to attract a pool of lovely, gullible young women who dreamed of being models. In 1974, under an assumed name, he picked up a wannabe cover girl in a shopping mall before drugging and raping her. He got a plea bargain which got him on probation and more psychiatric care, which didn't help him either. While on a visit home to his parents in 1982, he is accused of snatching 2 15-year-old girls and forcing them to take nude pictures. He was bailed out by his parents and returned to Florida to wait for a trial that would never happen due to constant delays. In early 1984, he befriended 2 women in Miami, one being 23-year-old Elizabeth Kenyon, a former beauty queen, and the other was Rosario Gonzalez, a 20-year-old model. Gonzalez disappeared on February 26 after leaving a Miami Grand Prix that Christopher had been competing in. Elizabeth Kenyon had dated Wilder and there's some talk of them marrying, but the former Orange Bowl princess and Miss Florida finalist turned him down. She was last seen alive at a gas station, recognized by a gas station attendant who said he saw her get into a car with a man fitting Wilder's description. When the 2 women disappeared last February and March, police started seeking Wilder for questioning, but he was nowhere to be found. In the middle of the last month, authorities started to gather information about rapes, tortures, and murders of attractive young women in Florida, Texas, Colorado, and Nevada. On March 18th, he baited 21-year-old Terry Ferguson away from a shopping center in Satellite Beach and murdered her, disposing her corpse at Canaveral Groves, where it was identified on March 23rd. Wilder's next victim was a 19-year-old woman who he abducted and transported to Bainbridge, Georgia on March 20th. He assaulted the woman after she had declined his offer to photograph her for a modeling agency. He wrapped her in a blanket and put her into the trunk of his car while binding her hands so she can't escape. He took the woman to a motel room that night where he raped her and glued her eyes shut while wrapping wires around her feet, electrocuting her. When she tried to escape him, Wilder tried to kill her, but fled after her screams attracted the other guests' attention. The Charlie Project also associates that Wilder was in connection with the disappearance of Colleen Osborne from Daytona Beach on March 19th. On March 21st, Wilder approached 24-year-old Terry Walden in Beaumont, Texas, asking her if she wanted to pose as a model for pictures. Walden denied his offer and disappeared 2 days later. Christopher stole her car and placed his other stolen license plates on her Mercury Cougar while dumping her body in a canal where she was found 3 days later. That same day, another body of 21-year-old Suzanne Logan was found in Oklahoma City, who had disappeared the day before. Logan was raped and tortured before being stabbed to death. He also used this technique on another victim, 18-year-old Cheryl, that he had kidnapped on March 29th. She was killed 2 days later after enduring rape and torture, whereas her body was found on May 5th. Wilder also killed 17-year-old Michelle Korfman, who was an aspiring model who disappeared from Las Vegas on April 1st, and her body remained undiscovered until May 13th. Later, near Torrance, California, Wilder photographed 16-year-old Tina Marie Risico before kidnapping her and driving her to El Centro, where she was sexually assaulted. Wilder believed Risico would be robotic enough to help him lure other unsuspecting victims, so he kept her alive and brought her with him to Taos, New Mexico. Around this time, Wilder had been on FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitive list for some time now, and was close to Mexico for some reason which has never been explained. He and Risico now traveled to Gary, Indiana, where she helped him abduct 16-year-old Donnette Wilt. Wilt was raped several times as Risico drove them to New York. Near Rochester, he forced Wilt into the woods and attempted to suffocate her before stabbing her twice, leaving her to die. Luckily, Wilt survived and told the police that Wilder was heading for Canada. While in Victor, New York, Risico swayed 33-year-old Beth Dodge to approach them. Wilder then grabbed Dodge and forced her into his car while having Risico follow him in Dodge's Trans Am. After a short drive, Wilder grew sick of her, shot her, and dumped her body into a gravel pit. He and Risico then drove Dodge's Trans Am to Logan Airport in Boston, where he bought her a ticket to Los Angeles. On April 18th, he attempted to abduct another young woman after she had denied his offer to take her on a ride to a gas station. She escaped, and shortly afterward, he arrived at a gas station in Colebrook, New Hampshire, where he was spotted by a state trooper. There was some debate on why Wilder drew unwanted attention on him while being on FBI's Most Wanted, but it is likely that the police would have been aware that he was driving a Trans Am, and Wilt told them that he had been heading for Canada in that same car. The troopers approached Wilder when he reached into his car for his .357 Magnum. Trooper Leo Jellison jumped onto Wilder's back, and during the scuffle, the gun went off twice. The first shot hit the killer and went into Jellison's liver. The second shot blew out Wilder's heart, killing him instantly. His death was officially listed as a suicide, and Officer Jellison made a full recovery from his injury. Christopher Bernard Wilder's body was cremated, and he left a personal estate worth almost $2 million. He was also connected with 8 known victims while being linked to many other murders and disappearances of many other women. Most of his victims' bodies were found around Florida, where he is known to stay. He is known as the Beauty Queen Killer due to his choice of women, who all had been younger and aspiring models.
Number 3. Gerald and Charlene Gallego, aka Sex Slave Killers. Gerald had a very abusive childhood. Gerald's mother had many boyfriends that beat him during his adolescence years. When Gerald's mom became a prostitute, he was abused by some of her customers. He was often left starving, dirty, always begging to be held and hugged. His real father, who he had never met, was executed for killing 2 police officers. Gerald's criminal record started at an early age of 6 years old, for which he had charges of burglary and sex offenses. By the time he was 12 years old, he had been placed on juvenile probation for burglary and later charged with committing lewd and lascivious acts with a 6-year-old girl. Gerald had failed as a husband and lover because he married numerous women but left them after they ran out of money. Also, he sexually abused his daughter during that time. Charlene, Gerald's wife, was born near Sacramento, California in October 1956. Her father was a well-known entrepreneur who was the vice president of a supermarket chain. Her father and mother often traveled a lot for their business life. Charlene was described as quiet and shy in her younger school days, who had excellent attendance. Her mother was hurt badly in a car accident, so she stopped traveling after that with her husband. Charlene took on her mother's work and would often travel with her father on business trips. Charlene was often complimented a lot by her father's clients for having excellent communication skills and very intelligent. By high school, she took drugs and bragged to her friends about a black lover. Eventually, Charlene married a young, rich man who had a heroin addiction. The man claimed she would be obsessed with lesbian sex, begging him to have a threesome with her and a prostitute. She took a lot of drugs while being with her first husband. He divorced Charlene after the marriage failed because he hated that her parents would intervene in their relationship. Charlene's second husband was a soldier that was described as a mother's boy. She divorced him after getting bored of him. Charlene had an affair with a married man who soon ended their relationship after she tried asking to have a threesome together with his wife. After they broke up, Charlene attempted to commit suicide, but she survived. Charlene and Gerald first started dating on September 10, 1977, with 19-year-old Charlene being 10 years younger than Gerald. Charlene got an abortion after getting pregnant with Gerald on July 9, 1978. On July 17, 1978, the couple had a sex party with Gerald's 14-year-old daughter and her friend. On September 10, 1978, Charlene kidnapped 17-year-old Rhonda Scheffler and 16-year-old Kippy Vaught. They were kidnapped from a Sacramento country club. In Baxter, California, Gerald repeatedly raped and sodomized both girls most of the night and forced them to perform sexual acts on Charlene. The next day, they forced the two girls to walk out in the field to a ditch. Soon after they arrived there, Gerald hit Kippy with a tire iron and then swung around with the tire iron, hitting Rhonda. He then took out his .25 caliber pistol, shooting both girls in the head. While Gerald was walking back to the victims, he saw Kippy move from where he originally shot her because the bullet only grazed her skull. He went up to Kippy and shot her 3 more times in the head, killing her immediately. Kippy and Rhonda's bodies were discovered by 2 farmers on September 13, 1978. The couple married on September 30, 1978, in Reno, even though it wasn't legal because Gerald never officially divorced his second wife. On June 24, 1979, the Gallegos then tricked 14-year-old Brenda Judd and 13-year-old Sandra Coley into their van at the Washoe County Fair in Nevada. They tricked them inside, promising to make them money for delivering leaflets. Charlene drove the van northeast out of Reno to Interstate 80, watching Gerald in the rearview mirror raping the 2 girls multiple times. Charlene then parked their van in a deserted area known as Humboldt Sink. Over the next couple of hours, Gerald lay down relaxing and watched Charlene force the 2 girls to perform sexual acts on each other. Gerald took out a shovel underneath their seat in the van, pulling Coley out of the van and forcing her to walk towards a dry creek bed. He then got behind her, striking her with a shovel, and Charlene recalled hearing a loud splat, like a flat rock hitting the mud. Unfortunately, that was Coley dropping to her knees and then fell down, face first. Gerald then beat Judd to death with a shovel, digging a deep hole, tossing both dead girls into that hole, and placed a rock over the grave. Their remains weren't discovered until November of 1999 by a tractor operator. On April 24, 1980, the Gallegos kidnapped 2 17-year-old teens, being Stacy Ann Redican and Karen Twiggs, from a shopping mall in Sacramento, California. They raped both women, and then Gerald beat them to death with a hammer. They were found in July, sexually abused and beaten to death. Charlene became pregnant again in June of 1980, but continued to help aid Gerald in more murders. On June 7, 1980, in Gold Beach, Oregon, the Gallegos traveled there for vacation, and they picked up a 21-year-old hitchhiking hippie named Linda Aguilar, who was 4 months pregnant. Once she got into the van, Gerald immediately started raping her, while Charlene was driving to the beach. Soon after they had arrived at the beach, Gerald smashed her head with a rock, buried her alive, and killed both Linda and her unborn baby. 2 weeks later, on June 22, 1980, tourists found her body in a shallow grave, and pathologists reported she was alive when buried. About a month later, on July 17, 1980, on Gerald's 34th birthday, he and his wife go to a Sail Inn where they kidnapped a barmaid who was serving alcohol to them. She was a 34-year-old mother of 2 named Virginia Machel, kidnapped from a car park. She was taken to the Gallegos' apartment, being tied up with fishing line, sodomized, and sexually abused by Gerald. He then strangled her to death and dumped her body by a pond. Investigators started interrogating Charlene, and she stated she was at a bar after a long day fishing with her husband, and she couldn't remember most of the night from drinking too much. Her charm made her get away from the authorities. On October 3rd, 1980, a fisherman discovered a nude decomposed body of Virginia Machel in some bushes near Clarksburg. Their last two victims were 22-year-old Craig Miller and his fiancée, 21-year-old Mary Elizabeth Sowers, in the early hours of November 2nd, 1980. The Gallegos abducted the couple after they had left a Sacramento State fraternity dinner. They were taken to a secluded area near Base Lake, California, with Gerald forcing Craig Miller out of the car and shooting him to death. Gerald got back into the van with her while Charlene drove to their apartment where Gerald raped Sowers. The couple then drove her to a field in Placer, California, where Gerald shot her 3 times to death. A friend of Miller and Sowers saw the kidnapping and reported the car's license plate numbers. Authorities used this information in their database to track down the Gallegos at an Omaha Western Union office on November 17, 1991. Charlene's parents had been trying to wire them money before they were both arrested for aiding and abetting. They both pleaded not guilty to charges of kidnapping and murder. Charlene got lucky and struck a deal for her to plead guilty to the murders of Craig Miller and Mary Beth Sowers. In exchange for her plea deal and her testimony against Gerald, she was given a sentence of 16 years and 8 months, which was the minimum time to which she could be sentenced in California for first-degree murder. Charlene was released in 1997, studying extensively in psychology, business, and Icelandic literature while she was in prison. She was reported to have had a photographic memory, which was helpful during the trials. Charlene convinced herself that she was the victim and even tried to save some of their lives, but others think that she liked it just as much as Gerald had. Gerald was sentenced to death, and he had not much to back himself up on during his first trial in California. Gerald's second trial began on May 23, 1984, in Pershing County, Nevada, and he was again sentenced to death. He became one of the few American criminals to be put on death row in 2 states simultaneously. Gerald died in a Nevada prison medical center while awaiting execution for his crimes. Number 2. Jake Bird, aka the Tacoma Axe Killer. Jake Bird was born in Louisiana in 1901 and had a troubled life that forced him to leave his home by the age of 19 to seek his fortune by riding the rails of America. Bird was described as a stereotypical hobo, sneaking into train cars only to hop off once the train reaches the next town. He would then trade a day of work for a night of sleep and a meal wherever he would stop to. Bird then would go the next day onto another train and start the same process again. He was unremarkable wherever he went, but it all changed when he reached his final stop in Tacoma. Tacoma was considered the city of destiny since it was the terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. On October 30th, 1947, Bird was 45 years old and was looking for work in the area. He ended up coming across the home of Bertha Cludd and their daughter Beverly June at 1007 South 21st Street, where the house still stands today. Bird entered their home, hacking the mother and daughter to death with an axe. They screamed during the attack, alerting surrounding neighbors who called the police immediately. Tacoma police officers Andrew Sabadas and Evan Davies arrived at the scene at 2:30 a.m. Both police officers found Bird covered in blood and fleeing from the scene out of the back door. He went out to the backyard, crashing through a picket fence while being chased by both officers. Bird jumped over several more backyard fences, but the fugitive was stopped by a tall fence and he was cornered in an alley behind 2122 South J Street. He pulled out a knife, attacking both officers, cutting Davies' hand and stabbed Sabadas in the shoulder. Officer Sabadas gave a left hook to the jaw and kicked Bird in the groin, arresting Bird afterward. Jake Bird was then taken to Tacoma General Hospital by Officer John Hickey in a patrol wagon, receiving treatment for head and face lacerations. Sabadas was brought into St. Joseph's Hospital with a severe back wound, and Davies had cuts on his hand that were stitched up. Authorities then brought him back in shackles to the old City Hall jail cells. When authorities entered the residence, they found Bertha Cludd, age 52, dead in her bedroom, and her 17-year-old daughter, Beverly Cludd's body on the kitchen floor. When questioned, Bird tried convincing the officers that he was innocent, but he had brain matter all over his shirt. The authorities were sure they had their man because of the evidence on his shirt. During Bird's confession, he killed 44 people that either kills himself or he helped kill during his travels, with only 11 murders being solved through his confession. Bird's first homicide he committed started in 1942 in Evanston, Illinois, with the axe murders of 2 women. Bird killed during his travels, with his confirmed victims in Illinois, Louisville, Kentucky, Omaha, Nebraska, Kansas City, Kansas, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Cleveland, Ohio, Orlando, Florida, and Portage, Wisconsin. On December 6, 1947, after a 3-day trial, Judge Hodge sentenced Bird to be hung on the gallows in the Washington State Penitentiary on January 16, 1948. When the judge asked Bird for any comments, he said, "I was given no chance to defend myself." Bird then said, "My own lawyers just asked you to hang me and apologized for defending him." Near the end of his 20-minute-long comments, Bird stated, "All of you who had anything to do with this case is going to die before he does." It was known for Bird to be called Jake Bird Hex because within a year of what he stated, 5 men connected with Bird's trial died. First to die was Judge Hodge, dying to a heart attack on January 1st, 1948. The next was Joseph Carpatch, who was an undersheriff that first took his confession. He died on April 5th, 1948, at the age of 46, the same way as Judge Hodge, from a heart attack. This happened to 3 more people, all dying from a heart attack, with the last victim being James Selden, who was Bird's defensive attorney on November 26, 1948. Bird appealed his conviction to the Washington State Supreme Court, but his petition was declined for a retrial. The U.S. Court of Appeals and U.S. Supreme Court also rejected Bird's petitions for a new trial. Soon after the appeal process was completed, Bird was scheduled for execution on July 15, 1949. On July 14th, U.S. Supreme Court declined to review Bird's conviction for the 3rd time, and Governor during that time being Arthur Langley chose not to interfere with the execution. Around 12:20 a.m. on July 15, 1949, with over 125 people watching, the gallows trapdoor was released, and Jake Bird dropped 5 feet to his death, hanging. After 14 minutes, his body was brought down, and prison doctor Elmer Hill pronounced him dead. Bird's body was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery, identified on the grave as convict number 21520. Bird willed his personal fortune of $6.15 to Murray Taggart, the attorney who filed his appeals. Jake Bird was the 63rd prisoner and 17th African American to be executed in Washington State since 1904, when the death penalty was established. Number 1. Carl Panzram, aka Jefferson Rhoades. Carl Panzram was born in Minnesota, who was the son of Prussian immigrants and raised on his family's farm. By his teens, he was an alcoholic and repeatedly in trouble with the authorities for his thievish nature. Around this age, he was 12, and he attended a state training school for his issues as a child. While attending there, he was heavily beaten by his fellow attendees, tortured, and even raped by staff. He burned down the place to get out of the school and lied on the reason why he burned down the institution while having the chance to leave the school for good. He also went to other schools around this time, threatening to kill his teacher, and even brought a gun that wouldn't shoot. By the age of 14, he ran home, claimed to have been gang raped by a group of hobos. He was also raped on other occasions because of train hopping to various locations. This made him harden, which turned him to his old ways of becoming a prolific thief. Carl was a troublemaker while incarcerated for his crimes, often attacking guards and refusing to follow their orders. The guards retaliated, subjecting him to beatings and punishments for his refusal to take orders. Carl was finally released after his sentence from 1908 to 1910 at Fort Leavenworth Disciplinary Barracks for larceny after enlisting in the U.S. Army in 1907. Around this time, William Howard Taft was Secretary of War and approved the sentence. On June 1, 1915, Panzram was arrested again and was under the supervision of Warden Harry Minto, who believed in harsh treatment of inmates. Carl was supposed to be incarcerated for 7 years, though he merely served 2 before escaping on September 18, 1917. Panzram was in solitary confinement because of his hatred for the new warden, who believed prison inmates should be subjected to beatings. He got revenge on the new warden when he helped Otto Hooker escape from prison. Otto Hooker was on the run and reached Albany before getting into an altercation with Warden Minto, shooting him dead with a gunshot to the head. Panzram was involved in 2 shootouts before being returned to prison again. While incarcerated, he found his way to a saw and hid it until the right moment to escape again, sawing through his cell's bars and escaping on May 12, 1918. This time, he avoided being captured and hitched on a freight train heading east, never returning to the northwest. Also, Carl changed his name to John O'Leary and shaved off his mustache. After Taft's term as a president, in 1920, Carl, who sought revenge, burglarized Taft's New Haven home. Carl stole copious amounts of jewelry and bonds, as well as Taft's .45 caliber handguns, which he then used in several murders. In Carl's autobiography, he wrote that he is rage personified and he would often rape men whom he robbed. Carl stated he did it because it was his method of dominating and humiliating people as he was in his past. After robbing Taft's handgun, he began a murder spree that spanned 8 years in multiple states. In 1920, Carl committed his first murders by luring sailors in New York away from local bars. Carl would get them drunk, rape, and shoot them while dumping their remains into the river. Panzram claimed to have killed 10 men using this technique while using a boat, dubbed the Akiska, to lure victims. Carl's rampage stopped due to karma coming his way when he crashed his vessel near Atlantic City, New Jersey, while 2 of his victims fled the vessel unharmed. After drifting for some time, he had numerous incidents with fighting and a shootout with the police. Carl then hid away on a ship to Africa. Carl landed himself in a Luanda city, and he took up working as a foreman on an oil rig for Sinclair Oil. Soon after working for quite some time, he couldn't hold in his urges and set his eyes on a young boy, around the age of 11 or 12 years old, wandering near the camp at the oil rig. He lured the boy to a nearby gravel pit, sodomized him, and bludgeoned him to death mercilessly. Carl also claimed more lives when he hired a canoe of 6 rowers to take him out to find crocodiles near Libido Bay. He then stopped in his boat, took out a gun, and shot each of the 6 rowers he hired. Afterward, he threw their bodies into the water for the gators. Carl made his way back to America in 1922. Plotting to steal a boat to pass off as his now wrecked yacht. Around this time, he was selling drugs for some time until he spotted 12-year-old George Henry McMahon, who was running errands for a neighbor that day. Carl lured George away with an offer to give him money, which George complied to and followed him to an isolated part of the town. The boy was raped numerous times and his mouth was stuffed with newspapers before beating him to death. The boy's remains were found 3 days later, hidden under some tree branches. Carl then finally found a boat to paint and pass on as his now wrecked Akiska, which he would use to pass on as a river pirate for the next year. Carl swayed his next victim into buying his boat from him, but he shot him in the head instead. He told his falsified story for which the man attempted to rob him during their transaction, and Carl convinced his lawyer to take his yacht for getting him out on bail. Carl then skipped town upon being released, making his way to Connecticut. He raped another boy in New Haven during this time, and sometime in August, he murdered 14-year-old Alexander Lazar in Philadelphia before making his way back to New York State. On August 23rd, Carl was subdued during an attempted burglary of the Larchmont train depot under the alias John O'Leary. While in jail, he told police he was a wanted man in Oregon for shooting a police officer and escaping jail, although he was lucky because people didn't believe him. Carl pled guilty to a plea deal which he only received 5 years in Clinton Correctional Facility, which is a notoriously harsh prison in Dannemora. Carl served his time and was released in 1928 and was known to have been abused by guards, though he got his revenge on abusing inmates. He also firebombed a workshop and suffered severe injuries when he tried escaping. He did not receive medical attention for an extended period of time after his attempt. On July 26, shortly after his release, Carl went on and killed a 14-year-old boy in Philadelphia named Alexander Ozaki by strangling him to death. After, he went off on a rampage, committing numerous burglaries and killing another man in Baltimore before he was finally apprehended in Washington. Carl stated he would tell anyone who listens about his previous crimes when he's incarcerated, including the murders of the young boys and men he raped and robbed. Soon enough, all his aliases linked up for the crimes he committed when he explained his convictions. He befriended 26-year-old prison guard Henry Lesser due to his kinder treatment of him. He even was given some paper and a pencil so he can write an articulate, extensive memoir of his crimes and his life philosophies. He gave his nihilistic and misanthropic views of the world to Henry Lesser since he had been the nicest guard to him since all his lockups. He was representing himself in the trial, which he received 25 years for because of all the evidence he provided on paper and by word of mouth. The prison he was supposed to be serving time in was ironically Fort Leavenworth. When Carl arrived, he informed the warden named T.B. White that he would kill the first man to bother him, which the warden took that into consideration by segregating him from the rest of the prisoners. He also assigned him to laundry duty so that he could work alone. However, he was not always alone and was supervised by Robert Warnke, who is the prison's laundry foreman. He was known for being hard and strict, and on June 20th, 1929, Carl struck Robert to death with an iron bar while he was sitting at his desk. Carl also attempted to kill other inmates who had witnessed the murder of Robert, but Robert would be his final murder victim. Carl would smirk and taunt at the witnesses who testified at his trial, and it only took 45 minutes for the jury to find him guilty and sentence him to death. Carl refused to file any appeals in anyone's efforts to put petitions up for his sentence to change. Panzram was removed from his cell on September 22, 1930, and was taken to the gallows. The only witnesses were a handful of guards and reporters. Before the guards put the black hood over his head, he allegedly spat in the executioner's face. When asked for any last words, Carl responded, "Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're screwing around." He is buried at the Leavenworth Penitentiary Cemetery, and his grave is only marked with his prison number, 31614. I hope you enjoyed the video. Next video coming up is Serial Killers in Your State series, with Louisiana coming up next on our list. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe for more videos like this. Also, if you can turn on the bell in the lower left-hand corner of the video so it notifies you for upcoming videos, since YouTube changed the way to get notified for our latest uploads. Thanks, and stay tuned to our social media for updates, and have a great rest of your day.